So I wanted to say hello to Rick, who's up with us next. And Rick is actually going to be presenting on researching pollution tools for investigating pollution sources. But I wanted to say thank you to Rick and just put him on the spot because he's actually been an instrumental part in helping to plan this conference and making sure that we have good people and good films and really put a lot of attention into doing everything he could to be supportive. And part of our success and why this is so amazing is because of your help and being part of the team. Ganesh Cheesh, Rick.
Wow. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the recognition and Nita, Randy, the whole team. Thank you for putting on a amazing conference. And that's a hard presentation to follow. The film was amazing, and I have to say I'm lucky to have been able to float the Middle Fork of the Salmon River, and it's a truly magical place. So if you haven't had a chance and do, that's a river worth visiting. So turning from that emotional, beautiful setting to something a little bit more dry. I'm gonna talk to you all about researching pollution sources. So, and I'm gonna share my screen here. All right. So, as I think was mentioned earlier during the conference, I'm the policy analyst for the RTOC. I'm an attorney. I'm based in Spokane. I've worked for the RTOC for more than a decade. And have worked on putting together comments and providing legal advice and policy advice to the RTOC. I also should say the last slide is my contact information. If you want more information about what I'm going to present, copy of the slides, anything else, please let me know. The other thing, I want to plug three things before we get going. If you saw Gail's Clean Water Act panel earlier, she mentioned the Clean Water Act Owner's Manual. That is a really valuable resource. I'm lucky enough to have a paper copy, and in fact, there's a whole chapter there about collecting information about your watershed. So I definitely want to plug that. The other thing I want to plug is in the film festival, there's a film about the Spokane River and water quality issues and the Clean Water Act. So that ties in with what I'm going to talk about, what Gail talked about, and I'm going to moderate a panel. And that's my third plug to talk about the Spokane River and one of the Clean Water Act challenges faced there. So anyway, with that, I'm going to jump in. Sorry. So my goal for today's presentation is to talk quickly about why we should track pollution information, kind of focus on clean water and pollution tracking, a very brief on toxics and pollution tracking, show you about how do you file a Freedom of Information Act request and some other sources. I have 23 minutes, so this is just a snapshot. It's not an exhaustive list. As the policy analyst for the RTOC, if you would like me to present to your tribe or to your organization more about this, please let me know, and that's something we can arrange. I also have a technology warning. I'm going to show you some searches in real time. So if there are some glitches, I'm in advance, I'm going to ask for your patience. Oh. So why should we track pollution sources in our community? One is to effectively comment on permits that may come up, to effectively engage in government-to-government consultation. And this is important. Again, I'm going to talk a lot about the Clean Water Act. NPDES permits that are issued for pollution sources under the Clean Water Act are renewed every 5 years. So you have the opportunity about every 5 years to comment, engage in consultation on those. That's the same case with many other environmental permits under the Clean Air Act and other source or other laws. It's also helpful to track compliance. Is that factory or municipal wastewater plant in your community actually complying with the law. And tribes, environmental groups, individual citizens, states can bring legal action if they're not. And it's important to understand what are the impacts in your environment from some of these sources. So again, the Clean Water Act and many of our other pollution control laws, the Clean Air Act and others, allow a citizen, which is broadly defined as tribes, states, organizations, can bring a suit against a polluter that is not in compliance with the law. So let's look a little bit at water pollution sources. So what is an MPDS permit? Well, that's essentially a permit to discharge into a water of the U.S. I'm not going to go into that. That's a very contentious issue. Many lawsuits over what is a water of the U.S. right now. But essentially, if you've got a pipe into a water body, you probably need an MPDS permit. Now, an MPDS permit will have various requirements for that discharge, various conditions, and those typically are expressed as effluent limitations, which are stated in terms of mass. So you can discharge so many pounds per day of a pollution, or concentration, so many milligrams per liter of a pollution source, of a different pollutant. So the other thing that MPDS permits require is that these permit holders monitor what are they discharging. Are they in compliance with their permits? That's usually an explicit requirement in an MPDS permit. It requires these facilities to collect wastewater samples, conduct various tests of those samples, and then report that to a state agency and or EPA. Now, I often get a question, hey, Rick, wait a minute. We're asking the folks who are polluting to do the monitoring. And the simple answer to that is, yeah, a bit. It's kind of like the fox watching the hen house. But if you report a violation, chances are the state or EPA is going to work with you to come into compliance. If you lie on a discharge monitoring report, that's criminal, and you could go to jail. So most people are not going to lie on a discharge monitoring report. So what do these look like? Back in the day when I first started doing this, these were in paper. And so this is what a discharge monitoring report looks like. The different pollutant requirements. Here's what, it will list what the permit requirements are and what the sample is. And when you're reading these, in the old days, there's a column number of exceedances. So this is a facility in the north part of Idaho, and they exceeded their E. coli numbers. You can see that here. They're, the number that they have to meet at 126, they were at 518. And they had 3 exceedances of chlorine. One here, 0.1, they were at 0.11. So not a lot, 0.5, or 0.15, 0.2. So this is an example of a discharge monitoring report that is not, where there's some violations. So nowadays, you don't necessarily see those paper documents. And in fact, EPA has a great tool, and I'll demonstrate this, called ECHO, the Enforcement and Compliance History Online website. And here, I'm just going to click on this. Hopefully the technology is working. So you can go to ECHO, and let's choose Dillingham, Alaska. All right. Let's see, and what happens? Well, shows you a map of all the facilities that have permits that are covered under MPDS permits, and so there's some other permit programs, and they found 25 facilities. So if you are wanting to research your watershed, you can go to ECHO, type in your zip code, the name of the closest village or town, and it will show you, here's the facilities. The other thing that's really interesting is, are there significant violations and quarters with non-compliance? So looking at this, So here you can see a number of different sources, including, hey, wait a minute, the Dillingham wastewater treatment plant right here had significant violations and had 12 quarters of non-compliance. All right, well, let's take a look. What kind of information do we get? All right, so it will tell us where is it, what is this facility, where is it located, a little aerial map of it. And then if we scroll down, lots of information about the facility. You can go down here, 3-year compliance history by quarter. And you can see, so BOD, I'm a lawyer, I'm not a water quality guy, so I'll let you interpret what BOD is. But, over the past several quarters, they've had significant violations, as bad as 487% over their permit limit. So almost 5 times over their permit limit. Total suspended solids. You can scroll down a little bit more. Ooh, they were at 1,346% over their permit limit. So almost 14 times or 13.5 times over their permit limit for total suspended solids, and pretty consistently. So if I was tracking pollution sources in the watershed, I would probably give this facility a call, or City of Dillingham, and say, what's going on? What can we do to help you get into compliance? I'm also a lawyer, and if they said, well, nothing, we're not interested, well, then, you might want to look at legal options. Oh, I just noticed this. Fecal coliform, they were 4,591% over their permit limit. So anyway, so that's ECHO. All right, so what about, you just want to know generally about permits in your community. Well, again, and I'll make this website available. In Alaska, and you'll notice there are EPA issued permits for states, and then there are state issued permits. So let's look at, what does the DEC in Alaska do? Let's say you live in Anchorage and you're curious about permits that are issued there. Well, you can go to the water permit search program. You can type, here's when all the permits and when they were issued. Let's say you want the Matson Terminal in Anchorage. Okay, you click on that. Gives you some information. When was it issued? When does it expire? And remember, I said permits are supposed to last only 5 years. Often they're extended, but technically they're a 5-year permit, and you want to see it. So you can click there, and there's the permit. So you can find out, what is the facility, when does it, when was it issued, and find out information, relevant to that permit. And all states make that information available. The state of Washington's Paris database, which actually was down today for some upgrades, so I can't show it to you, has the best website. They actually combine the information about permits, so you can get copies of the permits and all sorts of correspondence and inspections of that facility, as well as information about violations. So that's actually, good job, State of Washington, for making information available and very transparent. So what are some other tips for getting information about water pollution sources? Well, first, if there's something you're concerned about, as a tribe, ask for EPA for consultation on a facility if you have concerns. The other thing you should do is contact a state agency and ask to be on the mailing list for any public information about facilities in your watershed or your community that you're concerned about. There's a requirement that when new permits are issued, or if there's any significant changes, that there's public notice. So ask to be on the mail or email list for the facility. You could call and ask for the current permit if you can't find it online. Also, try to get information about the permits, ahead of time. What are some of the issues facing the permit? Often when new permits come out, if you want to comment, you only get 30 days. You can ask for an extension, but it's up to the agency whether or not to give it to you. Get additional information about that watershed. Is there a TMDL or water quality cleanup plan? Is that watershed listed on the state's list of impaired water bodies, also known as the 303D list? Are there reports about the facility, including inspection reports? And if need be, if it's something you're really concerned about, set up a monitoring program. One of the easiest things to do to understand the impacts of a pollution source, particularly if you're on a stream, sample upstream, sample downstream, and what's the difference? The important thing is make sure you have a quality assurance project plan for your monitoring, because then it can be used legally in the process. So let me show you some examples of, getting some information, what you can find out. Well, I was working with some folks who were concerned about some trailer parks and didn't think that they had any wastewater treatment. So we actually reviewed a TMDL back in 2007, an old TMDL, and that indicated that these two trailer parks had applied to EPA for an NPDES permit and planned to apply for an NPDES permit. Well, when we talked to EPA, they said, no, they haven't applied for an NPDES permit. And lo and behold, they were discharging into a watershed without a permit. So, and this was pointed out, and they came into compliance. We got a copy of, in another watershed, Whitebird Creek in central Idaho, a inspection report for a little town there. And the inspector for the state went out there and conducted, as you can see in the top right-hand corner, some reconnaissance and indicated the facility has no NPDES permit, but discharges to the Whitebird Creek streambed. And that was a document from the state of Idaho, their Department of Environmental Quality, and sure enough, they did not have a permit. And as a result of some urging, they ended up with a permit, and they did some significant upgrades to their facility. All right, so I know I'm cruising through this, but I only got about 9 more minutes and want to make sure I point out some additional information. Toxics pollution, you want to know about what sort of facilities in your community are using toxics or potentially releasing toxics. EPA, again, has the toxics release inventory. So I'll show you an example of that. Here's their website. And this is kind of cool because you can actually even, so I'm gonna just use my location. All right, so I'm in Spokane. All right, so you can tell here, how much did a facility release in toxics by the color. White is 0, dark purple is more than 1 million pounds. So this facility is kind of in the middle, Inland Empire paper. Let's click on that, confirm it, view facility summary, and you can find out they released for 2018 almost 14,000 pounds of toxics. There's a comparison. This facility represents 8% of the toxic releases in Spokane. There's 29 TRI facilities in Spokane. So let's view some more information. And all right, let's look at what are its releases. And again, it shows you by chemical over year, what were they releasing and how much. So methanol, was the biggest release, or looked like primary release in 2019. And it will also tell you, over the history, here's, types of the chemicals released and how was it released. By far, air is the biggest method, and then water. So again, TRI, looking at sources of toxic pollution in your community. And again, you know, you can use your zip code. You can just click the button, you know, near you, and when you use that button near you, can actually expand the circle. All right, the catch-all source. You don't know where else to go to, but you think EPA has some information. So FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act, really interesting law. It was passed after Watergate, when, you know, all the shenanigans with President Nixon. We didn't trust our government, so we passed the Freedom of Information Act, or Congress passed it, to make government transparent. So a lot of people don't like using FOIA, look at it as adversarial. It's not. It's a way to get documents. But as a tribe, again, very first, I would ask, you know, your partners at EPA or whatever the federal agency is for the documents. You know, they owe tribes a trust responsibility. They should share documents. Other things you can do: check a website, call and ask for the documents, first verbally, then in writing. If you're going to engage in consultation, I would come up with a list of what documents you need from EPA or other federal agency in advance to consult. If you're talking about a permit or a NEPA document, ask for those ahead of time. Only if you're unsuccessful, I would urge to file a FOIA request. They can be slow. It only applies to federal agencies, but it's anything that's in their possession. So if Pebble Partnership wrote a letter to EPA, even though it's not a federal document, it's in their control. There can be fees, but you can ask for a waiver. And then different agencies have different FOIA pages. So I'm going to show you quickly. FOIAonline.gov. That's where you get EPA documents. Now, cool thing about this is you can actually search other people's FOIA requests. So I just typed in Pebble, and you can limit it to agency. So let's look at EPA. So bunch of requests, FOIA requests about Pebble from EPA. I think it's a safe guess that that has to do with Pebble Mine. Then submit a request. Now, you do have to create a login here. Just ask for some basic information. You know, so you want to go to EPA, or so, you know, FOIA request. You fill in your name, your address, and other information. How much are you willing to pay? Sometimes they'll charge you, but down below there's a box to check for requesting exemption, and you fill in the information. Be as specific as possible. If you're looking for a draft permit on a local facility that you can't find, indicate that. Where is the facility located? If you want correspondence, for example, if you think you want to hear, you know, about sample reports that a local discharger may have submitted to EPA, and you want them for the last 2 years, indicate that in the description. So this is great because everything now is online. They'll make the documents available electronically, and you'll be able to click there to get copies of those. But I always start with looking at, has somebody else already requested this information? All right, I've got about 3 minutes here. So other places to look for information. One, RTOC, call us. We might be able to, if we don't know about it, we might be able to help you find the information you're looking for. All right, 2 other documents that you should be aware of. TCOTS, which is EPA's Tribal Consultation Database. So this is everything that EPA technically is consulting on right now. So, and you can look, what is the lead office? So right now EPA is engaged in consultation on the Alaska Water Quality Standards Narrative Residues Criteria. So that's a change to Washington's water quality standards. They're involved in consultation on the federal air rule for reservations in Idaho, Oregon, and Washington in Region 10. You can also see, if you see that and it doesn't specify a region, that means it's a national rule. So they're updating their information quality system policies and procedures. And there's information here about where you can get more information. And this is an important thing. When did the consultation start and when does it end? The regulatory rollback, let me click on this real quick. So if you want to know what rules are being changed, this is not an EPA website. This is actually being run through Harvard Law School, the environmental law program. So you can look at what are some of the rules and regulations that are being changed right now, including certain facilities. So what's happening with the Bristol Bay mine? Well, it gives you information about it, why it matters, what's current status are, including, are there lawsuits about it? So this is a really helpful resource. And then the last thing I just want to show is the Federal Register. So when the federal government engages in decision making, they've got to formally provide notice via the Federal Register. So if you're interested in coastal zone issues, you can click on that, and maybe you want to limit it to EPA. So it will tell you, okay, you want to know the newest ones. Some of these are going to be pretty old. And it will show that information for you. So a really good resource for keeping track of what's going on. So I know that's a lot. That's why I'm available. Email me, give me a call. Again, we're happy to present to your tribe, your organization, either in a formal way or informal way, more about this issue. So again, I would encourage you to stay for the next panel, which I'll be moderating, to talk about another Clean Water Act issue that's the tribes and others are facing on the Spokane River. And I would love to take questions, but it looks like I'm a minute over my time. So I'm gonna leave it at that.